Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on an epic journey, not across vast, unforgiving landscapes, but into the gilded, yet often gruesome, cage that was the life of a Chinese emperor. Forget the boundless power, the endless riches, and the countless servants you might imagine. We're going to pull back the silk curtains and reveal why life as a Chinese emperor was, in fact, absolutely awful. Imagine yourself waking up in a vast, opulent palace, surrounded by thousands, yet utterly alone. Every breath you take dictated by ancient protocol. Every meal potentially poisoned. Sounds like a golden nightmare. Right being a Chinese emperor delivered absolute power to the world. But here's the cheeky reality check if you were a Chinese emperor. You probably won't survive this. At least, not with all your sanity, your family intact, or a genuine smile on your face. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first taste of imperial misery, ironically, would come from the very grandeur designed to elevate you: extreme isolation, forbidden city, ritualized life. Forget casual strolls or spontaneous outings. Once you ascended the dragon throne, your world shrank to the confines of the palace, transforming your existence into a gilded, public solitude. Imagine the sheer scale of the Forbidden City or any imperial palace complex. It wasn't just a building, it was a sprawling, meticulously planned labyrinth of halls, courtyards, temples, and residential quarters, enclosed by towering walls. Within these walls lived thousands of people: eunuchs, concubines, officials, guards, and servants. Yet, despite being surrounded by this multitude, you, the emperor, would experience a profound and terrifying extreme isolation. Everyone was there to serve you, but no one could truly be with you. It's like living in the most luxurious, heavily guarded resort on Earth. But you're the only guest who isn't allowed to leave or speak freely with anyone. Your every waking moment would be governed by a ritualized life. From the moment you arose, your day was meticulously choreographed. There were specific ceremonies for dressing, for eating, for meeting officials, for praying, and even for sleeping. Every gesture, every word, every movement was prescribed by centuries of tradition and protocol. Imagine having to perform a complex dance routine just to get out of bed in the morning, knowing that dozens of eyes are watching your every move. Spontaneity was an alien concept. Your life was a continuous, elaborate performance for an unseen audience, both mortal and divine. Access to you was severely restricted. Only a select few high-ranking officials and trusted eunuchs would have direct contact. Even your own family members, your mother, brothers, and children, would interact with you according to rigid court etiquette, rarely in private or informally. Imagine growing up surrounded by people, then suddenly being elevated to a position where genuine, unvarnished human connection becomes almost impossible. Everyone around you was seeking favor, power, or personal gain, making sincere affection or friendship a dangerous illusion. This constant performance and restricted interaction fostered an environment of profound loneliness. You might have thousands of people catering to your every whim, but not a single true confidant. The weight of the empire rested solely on your shoulders, and you bore it in terrifying solitude. Cut off from the ordinary world and genuine human connection. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this isolation is the strict curtain rule Cui Lian Ting Zheng, Cui Lian Ting Zheng, where even powerful empress dowagers, acting as regents, would conduct imperial business from behind a screen or curtain, emphasizing the emperor's or regent's sacred, almost untouchable, distance from the mundane world. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, desperate for a genuine laugh or informal interaction, would occasionally create elaborate games or puzzles for their eunuchs, sometimes even engaging in playful banter, a rare and fleeting glimpse of their humanity amidst the rigid formality. Imagine the Son of Heaven playing a complicated game of charades just to feel a bit normal. It's a poignant insight into their lonely existence. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation of Chinese emperors primarily served to enhance their divine status and reinforce their absolute authority, making them seem godlike, or if it significantly contributed to their detachment from reality, leading to poor governance and psychological distress. Did it empower them, or imprison them? Regardless, your life as a Chinese emperor would begin with the suffocating realization that supreme power came at the cost of profound, extreme isolation, turning your magnificent palace into a gilded cage and your every moment into a meticulously ritualized life. So, your life as a Chinese emperor would begin with the suffocating realization that supreme power came at the cost of profound, extreme isolation. But even within the gilded cage of your palace, surrounded by supposedly loyal servants, a far more terrifying reality lurked in every shadow constant threat of assassination, poison, plots, palace intrigue. Forget a safe, secure existence. The Dragon Throne was a magnet for ambition and treachery, making every day a paranoid dance with death. Imagine sitting down for a meal. Is that delicious-looking dish of stewed duck a culinary delight? Or has it been subtly laced with a slow-acting toxin designed to weaken you over weeks? Or a fast-acting one to send you to your ancestors before dessert? The constant threat of assassination was a pervasive fear for almost every Chinese emperor. Regardless of their popularity or effectiveness, the stakes were absolute power, and the prize was life itself. Making murder a surprisingly common path to advancement in imperial circles, it's like living in a permanent, high-stakes game of Clue, but you're always Colonel Mustard in the library with the lead pipe. Poison was a particularly insidious weapon. It left no obvious wounds, could be administered subtly over time, and was incredibly difficult to trace in a pre-forensic era. Eunuchs, palace maids, disgruntled officials, rival family members, or even jealous concubines could all be potential poisoners. Imagine having to test every single dish, every cup of tea, every new medicine, with eunuchs or trusted food tasters, constantly wondering if this time they would drop dead instead of you. This paranoia would extend to everything you touched, drank, or inhaled. Beyond poison, plots were an ever-present danger. High-ranking officials might conspire with imperial relatives, eunuch factions might scheme amongst themselves, or ambitious generals might harbor designs on the throne. These plots often involved elaborate webs of deception, bribery, and secret alliances, culminating in attempts to overthrow you through force or subterfuge. Imagine always having to look over your shoulder, trusting no one entirely, deciphering cryptic whispers, and questioning the loyalty of everyone around you, even those closest to you. The palace intrigue was relentless. The Forbidden City was a microcosm of the empire, a viper's nest of ambition where factions constantly vied for influence, access to the emperor, and control over the levers of power, rivalry between imperial consorts, between eunuch cliques, or between powerful official families could escalate rapidly, with the emperor often caught in the crossfire or becoming the ultimate target. Imagine a constant soap opera playing out around you, but with lethal consequences for the losing side, and you're the main character everyone wants to replace. This pervasive atmosphere of suspicion and danger meant that many emperors lived in a state of chronic paranoia, unable to truly relax or trust anyone. Sleep would be fitful, and peace of mind a luxury rarely afforded. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this constant threat is the numerous documented instances of imperial assassinations or suspicious deaths throughout Chinese dynastic history, such as the poisoning of Emperor Guangxu by Empress Dowager Cixi, or various emperors dying under mysterious circumstances, lending credence to pervasive fears. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors were so paranoid about assassination that they would employ shadow guards, eunuchs, or bodyguards who would literally sleep standing up or sitting directly outside the emperor's bedchamber door, ready to spring into action at the slightest sound. Imagine having someone just stand there, silently, all night, just in case. It's an unnerving level of security. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of imperial assassinations in China primarily stemmed from the inherent instability of absolute monarchy, where power vacuums created fertile ground for ambitious individuals, or if it was exacerbated by specific cultural or political traditions that legitimized the overthrow of a bad emperor who had lost the mandate of heaven. Was it the system, or the belief, regardless? Your life as a Chinese emperor was a terrifying tightrope walk, shadowed by the constant threat of assassination, where every interaction was potentially a plot, and your closest confidants might be secretly preparing your demise with poison as part of the endless palace intrigue. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was a terrifying tightrope walk, shadowed by the constant threat of assassination, where every interaction was potentially a plot, and your closest confidants might be secretly preparing your demise. But even if you miraculously dodged the poison and outmaneuvered the plotters, your daily existence remained an oppressive burden, dominated by endless rituals and etiquette-strict protocols. No spontaneity. Forget casual mornings or impromptu decisions. Every single action you took, from sunrise to sunset, was governed by an ancient, suffocating web of ceremonial rules, transforming your life into a never-ending performance. Imagine waking in your imperial bedchamber. The first sounds you'd hear wouldn't be your own alarm, but the quiet rustle of dozens of eunuchs and palace maids, meticulously preparing your clothes, your bathwater, and your first meager ritual meal. From that moment, your day was a pre-written script. There were strict protocols for everything: how you dressed, how you walked a special dragon walk might be required, how you sat, how you stood, and even how you greeted various officials and family members. Imagine being unable to simply scratch an itch without potentially breaking an ancient rule of imperial decorum. It's like living in a perpetual, very serious, and utterly exhausting Broadway play. And you're the lead actor who can never miss a line. Your interactions with anyone, from your most trusted minister to your own mother, would be governed by elaborate etiquette. There were specific bowing requirements, kneeling requirements, and precise forms of address for every single person. Conversations were not fluid exchanges of ideas, but carefully choreographed dances of deference and subtle power plays. Imagine never being able to have a truly honest, unscripted conversation with anyone, always aware that your words and gestures were being analyzed for proper adherence to protocol. This meant absolutely no spontaneity. Want to take a walk in the imperial gardens on a whim, impossible without a massive logistical undertaking involving guards, eunuchs, and official permission. Feel like trying a new dish for dinner. Unlikely. Given the pre-approved, highly structured meal plans designed for safety and tradition, every desire, every impulse, every casual thought had to be filtered through layers of bureaucracy and tradition, often rendering it impossible or too much trouble. It's enough to make you wish for the simple freedom of making your own sandwich. The emperor was seen as the son of heaven, the intermediary between the celestial realm and humanity. Therefore, his every action had cosmic significance. Maintaining these rituals was believed to ensure the harmony of the universe and the prosperity of the empire. This elevated your life from personal choices to sacred duty. But it also meant that your person became a symbol, rather than an individual. This constant performance and rigid adherence to centuries of tradition was psychologically draining. It left little room for personal expression, genuine emotion, or simply being a normal human being. The weight of tradition was suffocating, turning daily life into an exhausting, repetitive chore. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this ritualized existence is the meticulous records kept by imperial scribes detailing every aspect of the emperor's daily life. From his audiences with officials to his meals and even his sleep schedule, demonstrating the highly structured and publicly recorded nature of imperial existence. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors were known to secretly practice specific ceremonial movements or memorize long, archaic speeches, much like an actor rehearsing lines, in their private chambers, just to ensure perfect execution in public. Imagine the supreme ruler of an empire having to cram for his job like a student before a big exam. It highlights the performative nature of his role. Historians still argue whether the extensive system of imperial rituals and etiquette primarily served to stabilize the vast Chinese empire by reinforcing the emperor's divine authority and maintaining social order, or if it increasingly became an oppressive burden that stifled innovation and insulated emperors from the realities of their people, leading to dynastic decline. Did it create order, or just ossify the empire regardless? Your life as a Chinese emperor was an endless procession of strict protocols and endless rituals and etiquette, leaving absolutely no spontaneity and transforming your every waking moment into a meticulous, exhausting performance for the ages. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was an endless procession of strict protocols and endless rituals, leaving absolutely no spontaneity and transforming your every waking moment into a meticulous, exhausting performance for the ages. But even amidst this suffocating formality, a different kind of burden, often far more insidious, emerged from the very structure of the imperial household imperial harem complexities: jealousy, power struggles, poison. Forget romanticized images of beautiful concubines. The imperial harem was a dangerous, cutthroat world where women vied for your attention, their ambition fueling lethal rivalries that could ensnare you and your heirs. Imagine your family life within the Forbidden City. You, the emperor, had one empress, but hundreds, sometimes thousands, of concubines, categorized by rank, from favored consorts to lowly palace women. Each of these women, and their families behind them, understood that their status, wealth, and future depended entirely on your favor, and more importantly, on bearing you male heirs. This created an incredibly fertile ground for jealousy. Imagine a constant, simmering tension among hundreds of women, all competing for the affection and attention of one man, knowing that their very survival depended on it. It's like a never-ending, high-stakes reality TV show. but the elimination round involves actual death. This jealousy inevitably escalated into intense power struggles. The empress would try to assert her authority, but other high-ranking concubines, especially those who bore sons, would form alliances and scheme to elevate their own positions, or even to replace the empress. They would try to gain your ear, influence your decisions, and discredit their rivals. Imagine constant whispers, veiled accusations, and outright plotting happening right under your nose, often involving your own family members, all designed to gain an advantage in this ruthless game of imperial chess. The stakes were incredibly high, especially when it came to succession. A concubine whose son was chosen as crown prince would see her status skyrocket, and her family would gain immense influence. Conversely, a woman who lost favor, or whose son was overlooked, could face a life of obscurity, or worse. This desperation frequently led to extreme measures. And here, our old friend poison reappears. It was a common tool in the harem for eliminating rivals, not just other concubines, but sometimes even their children, or the eunuchs loyal to them. Imagine hearing rumors of suspicious deaths, of women mysteriously falling ill, and knowing that the same fate could befall your own beloved concubine or favorite son if they crossed the wrong person in the harem. It's a chilling reminder that even love and family within the palace walls were incredibly dangerous propositions. The emperor, despite his supreme power, was often caught in the middle of these relentless conflicts. He relied on the harem to produce heirs, yet it was a constant source of stress, paranoia, and potential threats to his own life and the stability of his dynasty. Managing the harem became a significant part of imperial governance, often consuming immense amounts of time and energy. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these complexities is the well-documented influence of powerful empresses and empress dowagers, such as Empress Lu during the Han Dynasty or Empress Dowager Cixi in the Qing Dynasty, who wielded immense power through their control of the harem and their influence over the emperor, often at the expense of rivals. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, overwhelmed by the constant bickering and plotting, would sometimes devise elaborate rotation schedules for concubines, or even use dice or lots to decide who would spend the night with them, simply to avoid accusations of favoritism and manage the endless demands. Imagine the ruler of millions using a medieval board game to decide his bedroom arrangements. It's a rather mundane solution to a truly lethal problem. Historians still argue whether the complex system of the imperial harem primarily served as a mechanism for dynastic continuity and the production of multiple heirs, thereby ensuring the survival of the imperial line, or if it was inherently destabilizing, fostering lethal power struggles that frequently undermined imperial authority and led to internal chaos. Did it ensure heirs, or just create enemies, regardless? Your personal life as a Chinese emperor was not a romantic fantasy, but a deeply perilous and exhausting negotiation of imperial harem complexities, where jealousy, power struggles, and the constant threat of poison made every intimate relationship a potential trap. So, your personal life as a Chinese emperor was not a romantic fantasy, but a deeply perilous and exhausting negotiation of imperial harem complexities, where jealousy, power struggles, and the constant threat of poison made every intimate relationship a potential trap. But beyond the inner sanctum of the palace, the true weight of your position would press down on you, leading to the immense burden of governance vast empire. Countless decisions. Forget endless leisure and pampered indulgence. Ruling China meant facing an overwhelming tide of responsibilities that consumed your every waking hour, demanding constant attention and immense mental fortitude. Imagine the sheer scale of what you were expected to manage. You were the son of heaven, ruling an empire that, at its peak, stretched across vast territories, encompassing diverse cultures, millions upon millions of subjects, and a complex bureaucracy that was centuries old. This was a vast empire, perhaps the largest and most populous political entity on Earth for much of its history. Imagine a country the size of a continent, with no internet, no phones, and no quick way to travel, and you're personally responsible for everything that happens within its borders. It's like being the CEO of the entire world, but your only communication method is carrier pigeon, and everyone expects you to personally approve every single expense report. Your daily life would be dominated by the burden of governance, from dawn until late into the night. You would be presented with memorials, petitions, and reports from every corner of the empire. Droughts in the north, rebellions in the south, banditry in the west, trade disputes in the east, appointments of officials, legal cases, military strategy, public works projects, everything eventually landed on your desk. Imagine a mountain of paperwork, written on bamboo slips or silk scrolls, detailing every problem imaginable, and you're expected to read, understand, and make countless decisions on each one. You are not merely a figurehead. As emperor, you were ultimately responsible for the well-being of your people, the stability of the state, and the proper functioning of the entire administrative apparatus. A single wrong decision could have catastrophic consequences: famine, rebellion, or invasion. Imagine carrying the weight of millions of lives on your shoulders, knowing that your judgment directly impacted their survival and prosperity. The pressure would be immense, often leading to mental and physical exhaustion, despite having an extensive bureaucracy. Every major decision required your final approval. You had to review proposals, write edicts, and mediate disputes among your ministers. This constant intellectual and administrative effort left little time for personal pursuits or relaxation. Your life truly belonged to the state, a relentless cycle of duty and decision-making. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this immense burden is the establishment of the Grand Secretariat and later the Grand Council during various dynasties A.G. Ming Emperors Qing, specifically created to assist emperors in managing the overwhelming volume of state affairs, indicating the sheer impossibility of one person handling everything alone. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in an attempt to manage the immense paperwork, would develop incredibly fast reading and writing habits, sometimes even employing multiple scribes to simultaneously record their dictates, essentially being medieval dictation machines on overdrive. Imagine the supreme ruler speed-reading through thousands of documents before breakfast. It speaks volumes about the sheer volume of work. Historians still argue whether the centralized, autocratic system of imperial governance in China primarily ensured long-term stability and unified control over vast territories, allowing for continuous dynastic rule, or if it inevitably led to imperial burnout, detachment, and reliance on corrupt or incompetent advisors, ultimately contributing to dynastic cycles of decline. Did it create stability, or just bottlenecks regardless? Your life as a Chinese emperor was a relentless, overwhelming commitment to the burden of governance, where the vast empire demanded countless decisions from your weary mind, making true respite a distant dream. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was a relentless, overwhelming commitment to the burden of governance, where the vast empire demanded countless decisions from your weary mind. But beyond the weight of bureaucracy, a far more visceral and terrifying threat constantly stalked your every step: fear of usurpation coups, rebellions, family betrayals. Forget secure power. The dragon throne was a perilous seat, with rivals, generals, and even your own relatives perpetually plotting to seize what you held, turning every political misstep into a potential death sentence. Imagine being the emperor. You hold ultimate power, but that power is also the ultimate target. The fear of usurpation was a deeply ingrained anxiety for almost every Chinese emperor. Dynasties rose and fell with alarming regularity, often violently, and the individual who held the throne was always vulnerable to those who believed they could rule better, or simply desired the power for themselves. It's like being the captain of a very valuable, but perpetually mutinous ship, and everyone below deck is eyeing your cabin. Coup were a constant danger, particularly from within the palace walls. Powerful eunuchs, ambitious generals controlling elite military units, or high-ranking court officials could conspire to overthrow you. These plots often involved secret meetings, bribery, and swift, decisive action to seize the imperial person or key palace gates. Imagine going to sleep one night as emperor, only to be woken by the sounds of fighting in the courtyards, realizing that your own guards might be turning against you, or that a trusted minister is leading a rebellion to dethrone you. It's enough to make you invest heavily in really good palace security. But even that often failed, beyond internal plots. Rebellions by discontented peasants, regional warlords, or ethnic minorities were a recurring nightmare for Chinese emperors. Famine, excessive taxes, or perceived imperial weakness could ignite widespread unrest, threatening the very foundations of your rule. While not an immediate personal threat like a palace coup, a large-scale rebellion could ultimately lead to your overthrow, capture, or forced suicide. Imagine getting reports of vast armies of angry farmers marching towards your capital, knowing that their success means the end of your dynasty, and possibly your life. Perhaps the most insidious threat came from family betrayals. Your own brothers, uncles, or even ambitious sons could harbor imperial ambitions. These blood ties, far from being a source of comfort, often made the danger even more acute. As these individuals had privileged access and intimate knowledge of the palace, dynastic histories are rife with accounts of princes executing their siblings, or sons conspiring against their fathers to seize power. Imagine your own brother, with whom you shared a childhood, secretly plotting your demise in order to claim the throne. It makes every family dinner feel incredibly awkward, and possibly lethal. This pervasive sense of insecurity and the constant need to identify and neutralize potential threats consumed immense imperial energy. Many emperors spent their reigns purging rivals, suppressing dissent, and maintaining elaborate spy networks, often at the expense of effective governance. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this fear of usurpation is the Jingnan campaign of the early Ming Dynasty 13999, where the Prince of Yan, the future Yongle Emperor, launched a massive civil war against his nephew, the Jianwen Emperor, eventually usurping the throne and demonstrating that even close family could wage brutal wars for imperial power. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some paranoid emperors would occasionally test the loyalty of their high-ranking officials by deliberately giving them misleading or dangerous orders, just to see if they would comply without question, essentially playing psychological games with their own administration. Imagine your boss giving you a ridiculous task just to see if you're loyal. It's a rather high-stakes performance review. Historians still argue whether the frequent occurrences of coups and usurpations in Chinese history primarily reflect a fundamental instability inherent in the system of absolute imperial power, which lacked clear rules of succession. or if they were largely a consequence of specific periods of weak imperial leadership and widespread corruption. Inviting challenges to authority. Was it the system? Or bad rulers regardless? Your reign as a Chinese emperor was a perpetual tightrope walk over an abyss of ambition, where the fear of usurpation, fueled by coups, rebellions, and chilling family betrayals, was a constant, terrifying companion. So, your reign as a Chinese emperor was a perpetual tightrope walk over an abyss of ambition, where the fear of usurpation, fueled by coups, rebellions, and chilling family betrayals, was a constant, terrifying companion. But even if you survived the plots and maintained your grip on power, another fundamental aspect of imperial life would gnaw at your very soul. Sacrificed personal freedom, no private life, constant scrutiny. Forget doing anything on a whim or enjoying quiet moments to yourself. Your entire existence was a public spectacle, dictated by your role, leaving no room for genuine selfhood. Imagine never being truly alone. From the moment you woke up to the moment you finally drifted off to sleep, you were surrounded by people. Eunuchs and palace maids attended to your every physical need, often sleeping just outside your bedchamber door. Imperial scribes might record your conversations and actions. Ministers and advisors would demand audiences. Even your leisure activities would be observed and often formalized. It's like living in the world's most elaborate and inescapable fishbowl, and everyone is constantly watching, judging, and analyzing your every move. You had no private life in the modern sense. Your thoughts, your emotions, your preferences, all were subject to interpretation and political manipulation. Any deviation from expected imperial behavior could be seen as a weakness, a bad omen, or even a sign of losing the mandate of heaven. Imagine feeling a moment of personal sadness or joy, but being unable to express it genuinely, knowing it might be misinterpreted or used against you. It's enough to make you wish for the simple anonymity of a common villager, where you could pick your nose without it becoming a historical footnote. The constant scrutiny was relentless. Every imperial action, every edict, every choice of consort, every public appearance was analyzed for hidden meaning, for signs of favor or disfavor, or for clues about the emperor's health or intentions. Officials would write lengthy memorials dissecting your decisions, eunuchs would whisper about your habits, chroniclers would record your every word. Imagine living your entire life under a microscope, where a casual sigh could be interpreted as a sign of imperial displeasure, or a slightly slumped posture as an omen of dynastic decline. This lack of personal freedom extended to even the most mundane aspects of your existence. You couldn't simply walk out of the Forbidden City and wander through the streets of the capital. Every movement required immense preparation, security, and ceremonial pomp. You couldn't freely choose your friends, as everyone around you had an agenda. You couldn't even choose your own food without it being tasted for poison. As we discussed, the emperor was not a person, but a symbol. His identity was subsumed by his role as the Son of Heaven, the embodiment of the state. This spiritual and political elevation came at the ultimate cost of individual autonomy and genuine human experience. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this sacrificed personal freedom is the emperor's strict daily schedule and limited interaction with the outside world. Often confirmed by official court diaries, e.g., the veritable records or diaries of activity and repose, which meticulously documented the emperor's public life and engagements, showing very little personal time. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, particularly those with artistic or scholarly inclinations, would reportedly have to conduct their hobbies in secret, or under the guise of imperial duty, simply to avoid being seen as frivolous or distracted from their solemn responsibilities. Imagine the ruler of millions having to hide his passion for painting like a naughty schoolboy. It shows the extent of the sacrifice. Historians still argue whether the complete sacrifice of personal freedom by Chinese emperors primarily ensured imperial stability by removing personal whims from governance, thus solidifying the state's power, or if it contributed to imperial detachment and psychological distress, ultimately hindering effective rule by isolating the emperor from reality. Did it strengthen the state, or weaken the ruler regardless? Your life as a Chinese emperor was a constant, suffocating reality of sacrificed personal freedom, with no private life to call your own, and subjected to the constant scrutiny of an entire empire. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was a constant, suffocating reality of sacrificed personal freedom, with no private life to call your own, and subjected to the constant scrutiny of an entire empire. But while you wrestled with the immense psychological burden of your role, your physical well-being was often under threat from another, more subtle source: health risks and superstition, dubious medicine. Alchemists. Forget evidence-based treatments and modern diagnostics. Imperial health was frequently undermined by a cocktail of unproven remedies, dangerous concoctions, and a profound reliance on mystical beliefs rather than scientific understanding. Imagine feeling unwell in the Forbidden City, perhaps a nagging cough, a persistent headache, or a mysterious ailment. You wouldn't call a modern doctor. Instead, you'd be attended by imperial physicians, who, despite their prestigious title, operated under a system largely governed by traditional Chinese medicine, which, while offering some effective herbal remedies, was often intertwined with deep-seated superstition and limited anatomical knowledge. It's like trusting your life to a medical system that's part herbalist, part fortune teller. The dubious medicine you'd receive would be a mix of the practical and the outright bizarre. Herbal concoctions, acupuncture, moxibustion burning mugwort on the skin, and dietary restrictions were common. Some of these might have offered mild relief, but many were ineffective, or worse, harmful. Imagine being prescribed a remedy made from ground-up animal parts or rare minerals, with no real understanding of their effects, all based on ancient texts and philosophical concepts rather than empirical evidence. A particularly dangerous aspect was the influence of alchemists. Many emperors, obsessed with the pursuit of immortality or enhanced vitality, would employ Taoist alchemists to concoct elixirs of life. These medicines often contained highly toxic substances like mercury, lead, and arsenic. These elements, while potentially leading to temporary bursts of energy or altered states due to poisoning, would invariably cause long-term, devastating damage to the nervous system, kidneys, and liver, often leading to mental deterioration, paralysis, and a painful death. Imagine willingly consuming liquid mercury because someone convinced you it would make you live forever. It's the ultimate bad marketing campaign. With fatal side effects, this reliance on superstition also extended to beliefs about illness, bad luck, angry spirits, or a loss of the mandate of heaven could be blamed for an emperor's declining health. This meant that alongside medical treatments, you might undergo elaborate rituals, prayers, or purification ceremonies, consuming valuable time and resources without addressing the underlying physical issues. The secrecy surrounding imperial health also hindered proper care. Doctors often feared delivering bad news to the emperor, or prescribing something that might displease him, leading to cautious or ineffective treatments. Your true condition might be hidden even from you. This combination of health risks from various diseases Remember the unsanitary conditions, poor diet from earlier sections and these unproven, often toxic. Treatments meant that many emperors suffered prolonged illnesses and died prematurely, ironically, often from the very cures meant to save them. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates these health risks and reliance on dubious medicine is the documented deaths of several Chinese emperors from consuming elixirs of immortality containing mercury and other toxic heavy metals. Particularly prominent during the Tang and Ming dynasties, such as Emperor Jiajing of the Ming, who died from chronic poisoning. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some imperial physicians, in an attempt to impress the emperor, would perform elaborate and highly dramatic diagnostic rituals, sometimes involving reading pulses from multiple parts of the body simultaneously or observing subtle changes in a patient's aura, regardless of their actual efficacy. Imagine a doctor telling you they can diagnose your headache by looking at the color of your aura. It's a rather theatrical approach to healthcare. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of dubious medicine and superstitious practices around Chinese emperors primarily reflected a genuine belief in the power of alchemy and spiritual cures, deeply rooted in philosophical traditions, or if it was often a calculated move by ambitious courtiers and charlatan healers to gain imperial favor and exert influence over a vulnerable ruler. Was it faith or fraud? Regardless, your body as a Chinese emperor was not just a vessel of power, but a fragile experiment, constantly exposed to health risks and subjected to dubious medicine and pervasive superstition, often at the hands of zealous alchemists seeking to prolong your life, but more often shortening it. So, your body as a Chinese emperor was not just a vessel of power, but a fragile experiment, constantly exposed to health risks and subjected to dubious medicine and pervasive superstition, often at the hands of zealous alchemists seeking to prolong your life, but more often shortening it. But even if you somehow maintained your health, another profound lack would hollow out your existence, limited genuine relationships, flattery, distrust, isolation. Forget true friendship or unvarnished affection. The imperial court was a viper's nest where self-interest reigned supreme, making authentic human connection almost impossible for the Son of Heaven. Imagine trying to form a bond with someone in the Forbidden City. Everyone around you, your eunuchs, your officials, your concubines, even your own family members had a vested interest in your favor. They understood that their wealth, power, and even their lives depended on pleasing you. This led to an environment saturated with flattery. Every word spoken to you would be carefully crafted, every gesture calculated to gain your approval. Imagine constantly hearing only what people thought you wanted to hear, being told you were brilliant, wise, and perfect, even when you knew you weren't. It's like living in a never-ending echo chamber, where your own ego is constantly being inflated by strategically placed compliments. This pervasive flattery inevitably bred profound distrust. You would constantly question everyone's motives. Was that minister truly loyal? Or was he merely seeking promotion? Did that concubine truly love you? Or was she simply vying for higher status or a better future for her son? You'd be acutely aware that many would betray you if it served their ambition. Imagine having to live your entire life suspecting everyone, from your closest advisors to your own blood, constantly searching for hidden agendas and veiled threats. It's enough to make you long for the simple honesty of a grumpy old farmer, who at least tells you what he thinks. The combination of flattery and distrust led to crushing isolation. Despite being surrounded by thousands, you would have very few, if any, true confidants. Who could you trust with your vulnerabilities, your doubts, your fears, When everyone was a potential plotter or sycophant, imperial history is filled with examples of emperors who confided only in a handful of eunuchs, a decision that often backfired as those eunuchs gained too much power and became corrupt. Imagine carrying the immense burden of the empire entirely alone, with no one to truly share your struggles or celebrate your genuine triumphs. This limited genuine relationships extended even to your family, as we touched on earlier. Interactions with your empress, concubines, children, and siblings were often highly formalized and driven by dynastic politics and succession concerns. Affection was secondary to duty and power. True, unguarded moments of familial love were rare and precious, easily poisoned by the pervasive atmosphere of suspicion. The emperor was a symbol, not just a man. His personal feelings and needs were secondary to the demands of the state. This dehumanization, while reinforcing his divine status, stripped him of the most fundamental human comforts: authentic connection and sincere affection. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this lack of genuine relationships is the common practice of emperors communicating with their grand counselors or chief eunuchs through written memorials or whispered conversations in highly controlled environments, rather than open, informal discussions, showcasing the formal and often suspicious nature of even top-level imperial interactions. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, feeling profoundly lonely, would sometimes develop surprisingly strong emotional bonds with their pets, like favored dogs or birds, treating them with a tenderness rarely shown to their human courtiers. Perhaps because animals offered unconditional affection without any hidden agenda. Imagine the supreme ruler of China pouring his heart out to a particularly fluffy Pekingese. It's a sad, yet understandable, coping mechanism. Historians still argue whether the lack of genuine relationships for Chinese emperors primarily contributed to psychological distress and detachment, hindering their ability to empathize with their subjects, or if it was a necessary consequence of absolute power, allowing them to make objective decisions without personal biases or emotional influence. Did it make them lonely? Or just effective regardless? Your heart as a Chinese emperor would ache with the pervasive truth of limited genuine relationships, drowned out by relentless flattery, suffocated by perpetual distrust, and ultimately defined by the profound, isolating loneliness of the throne. So, your heart as a Chinese emperor would ache with the pervasive truth of limited genuine relationships, drowned out by relentless flattery, suffocated by perpetual distrust, and ultimately defined by the profound, isolating loneliness of the throne. But even beyond the emotional void, another relentless pressure bore down on you, shaping your most intimate life choices and dictating your dynastic future. Constant pressure for heirs, dynastic survival, male offspring. Forget personal choice in family planning. Your primary duty as emperor was to produce a suitable male successor, transforming procreation into a matter of state, fraught with immense anxiety and political manipulation. Imagine your most private moments, not as intimate exchanges, but as acts of dynastic necessity, from the moment you ascended the throne, and often even before. The weight of dynastic survival rested squarely on your ability to produce a continuous line of heirs. If the line faltered, if you died without a legitimate son, the empire could descend into chaos, civil war, or be seized by ambitious rivals. This wasn't just about having children. It was about ensuring the stability and continuation of the entire Chinese state, a burden far heavier than any individual desire. It's like being in a perpetual genetic relay race, and if you drop the baton, the entire country collapses. The pressure intensified for male offspring, while daughters were valued. Only a son could inherit the dragon throne. The birth of a male heir would be celebrated across the empire, securing your legacy and alleviating immense pressure. The birth of a daughter, while welcome, did not fulfill the primary dynastic requirement. Imagine the anxiety with each pregnancy in the harem, the hopes and fears riding on the sex of the child. Knowing that the empire was essentially holding its breath for a baby boy, this constant pressure for heirs dictated your relationships within the harem. Concubines who bore sons gained immense prestige and influence, while those who remained childless, or only bore daughters, might fall out of favor or be relegated to obscurity. This fueled the fierce jealousy and power struggles we discussed earlier. Remember those harem complexities, as women desperately vied to be the mother of the future emperor. It also meant that many emperors had numerous consorts, not out of personal desire necessarily, but out of a desperate need to maximize their chances of producing a male heir. It's less like a love life, and more like a high-stakes breeding program. If an emperor struggled to produce an heir, the situation became even more dire. Superstitious beliefs might arise. Blaming divine displeasure, imperial physicians would be tasked with concocting fertility treatments, often those dubious. Mercury-laden elixirs. The search for a suitable successor, if no direct male heir was forthcoming, could lead to complex and dangerous political maneuvering, often involving adopting a distant relative or anointing a chosen prince. Each path fraught with its own risks of usurpation. The emperor's personal preference, his emotional bonds, and even his physical health were often secondary to this paramount dynastic duty. Your body became a tool for the state, your procreative ability a matter of imperial consequence. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this pressure is the practice of child adoption within the imperial family to secure the succession when a direct male heir was lacking, such as Emperor Daoguang of the Qing dynasty adopting a nephew, demonstrating the lengths to which emperors went to ensure dynastic continuity. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, particularly those with a strong desire for male heirs, would consult with Taoist priests or Buddhist monks who claimed to possess magical rituals or potions that could guarantee the birth of a son, adding a layer of spiritual desperation to their biological quest. Imagine the Son of Heaven performing a secret ritual involving incense and incantations just to try and ensure a baby boy. It highlights the profound pressure and anxiety they faced. Historians still argue whether the intense imperial pressure for male heirs primarily ensured the long-term stability and continuity of Chinese dynasties by providing clear lines of succession, or if it contributed to court intrigue, the neglect of female offspring, and the elevation of incompetent princes merely for their gender. Did it secure the dynasty, or just corrupt the court regardless? Your most intimate life as a Chinese emperor was never truly your own, relentlessly shaped by the constant pressure for heirs, driven by the imperative of dynastic survival, and focused solely on the elusive, yet vital, goal of producing a male offspring. So, your most intimate life as a Chinese emperor was never truly your own, relentlessly shaped by the constant pressure for heirs, driven by the imperative of dynastic survival, and focused solely on the elusive, yet vital, goal of producing a male offspring. But even if you succeeded in this critical duty, your daily work was still a seemingly endless struggle against an invisible foe, endless bureaucracy petitions, edicts, inefficient system. Forget cutting-edge management techniques or streamlined processes. Ruling China meant drowning in a sea of paperwork, navigating a labyrinthine administrative structure that often hindered more than it helped. Imagine your typical workday in the imperial chambers. It wouldn't be spent strategizing grand military campaigns on a map or issuing soaring pronouncements from your throne. Instead, you'd be confronted with an immense, literal pile of documents. This was the endless bureaucracy of the Chinese Empire, a system built up over centuries, designed to manage the vastness of the state, but often characterized by frustrating inefficiency. It's like being trapped in the world's largest, most ancient filing cabinet, and every single file needs your personal approval. Your primary interaction with the empire would be through petitions memorials submitted by officials from every province and every government department. These documents, often written in highly formal, archaic language, detailed everything from famine relief requests and banditry reports to proposed new laws and personnel appointments. You were expected to read them all, understand their implications, and then issue your own instructions. Imagine deciphering thousands of pages of dense, classical Chinese, often addressing trivial matters alongside urgent crises. Day after day after day. It's enough to make you long for a simple reply all button. Once you made a decision, it would be formalized into an edict. These imperial decrees, once drafted and approved, would then be sent out through the sprawling bureaucratic network, often facing delays and misinterpretations as they trickled down through various layers of administration. There was no instant messaging or email. Communication was slow and prone to error. Imagine trying to implement a major policy change, knowing it might take months for your orders to reach the furthest provinces, and even longer for any feedback to return to you. The inefficient system wasn't just about slow communication, it was also riddled with corruption, internal rivalries, and entrenched procedures that prioritized tradition over effectiveness. Officials might deliberately delay documents, provide misleading information, or simply be incompetent. You, the emperor, had to constantly contend with these systemic flaws, trying to exert control over a machinery that was often too vast and too complex to manage effectively. It's like trying to steer an enormous, ancient supertanker with a leaky rudder and a crew that sometimes forgets which way is forward. This constant administrative grind, coupled with the immense volume of information, was mentally exhausting. It left little room for creative governance or strategic thinking, instead forcing you into a reactive role, perpetually bogged down by the minutiae of a cumbersome system. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this bureaucratic burden is the official practice of daily audiences, zhao chao, where emperors would meet with their top officials at dawn to discuss and process state affairs, often lasting for hours. Highlighting the sheer volume of daily administrative work, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, overwhelmed by the volume of memorials, would secretly instruct trusted eunuchs to pre-screen documents and highlight only the most critical ones, effectively delegating their reading even though officially they were expected to review everything. Imagine the Son of Heaven relying on his personal assistant to filter his emails before he even sees them. It's a very practical, if somewhat unofficial, imperial life hack. Historians still argue whether the extensive and hierarchical Chinese bureaucracy primarily ensured the long-term stability and continuity of imperial rule by providing a robust administrative framework, or if it increasingly became a rigid and self-serving entity that stifled reform, encouraged corruption, and ultimately hindered effective governance. Did it hold the empire together, or hold it back regardless? Your reign as a Chinese emperor was largely consumed by the endless bureaucracy, buried under mountains of petitions and edicts, and constantly frustrated by an inherently inefficient system that made truly impactful governance a daily, uphill battle. So, your reign as a Chinese emperor was largely consumed by the endless bureaucracy, buried under mountains of petitions and edicts, and constantly frustrated by an inherently inefficient system. But even if you manage to navigate the internal complexities of governance, an even more terrifying external force could strike at any moment, shaking the very foundations of your legitimacy. Risk of natural disasters: blame, famine, omens of doom. Forget climate control or modern relief efforts. As emperor, you were held personally responsible for the whims of nature, transforming floods, droughts, or earthquakes into terrifying signs of your potential failure. Imagine a clear blue sky suddenly turning ominous. Reports begin to flood in from the provinces. A devastating drought has struck. Crops are failing, rivers are overflowing their banks, or the ground has violently trembled. For you, the emperor, this wasn't just an unfortunate event. It was a profound crisis of legitimacy. According to the foundational concept of the mandate of heaven, your right to rule was granted by heaven itself, based on your virtuous and effective governance. Therefore, natural disasters were often interpreted as heaven's displeasure, a clear omen of doom indicating that you had lost the mandate. It's like being the CEO of a company, and every time there's a bad quarter, the entire world thinks you're personally cursed by the universe. The direct consequences were horrifying. A major drought or flood would inevitably lead to famine. Millions of your subjects, already living on the edge of subsistence, would face starvation. This would lead to widespread suffering, mass migrations, and, inevitably, social unrest and peasant rebellions. Remember those threats of usurpation. Imagine receiving memorials detailing the starvation of entire populations, knowing that you, the Son of Heaven, were considered responsible for their plight. The moral burden would be crushing. Moreover, the blame for these disasters would fall squarely on your shoulders. Officials would submit memorials subtly or overtly criticizing your lack of virtue, suggesting that your conduct had angered heaven. The populace would whisper about your shortcomings, their desperation turning into resentment. Even if you initiated massive relief efforts, opening granaries, distributing food, sending aid, the initial disaster itself was seen as a sign of your divine disfavor. It's enough to make you dread rainy seasons and fault lines. This constant pressure meant that emperors were perpetually anxious about natural phenomena. Astrologers and diviners would be consulted for interpretations of unusual celestial events or weather patterns, seeking to understand heaven's will or to appease it. Public rituals and penitential ceremonies would be performed to beg heaven for forgiveness or favor, often led by the emperor himself, a public display of humility designed to regain legitimacy. The risk of natural disasters therefore added another layer of profound stress and insecurity to the imperial role, turning unpredictable acts of nature into direct challenges to your very right to rule, demanding constant vigilance and often futile efforts to appease the heavens. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this imperial accountability for natural disasters is the frequent use of natural omens, like comets, eclipses, or unusual weather phenomena, as political tools by officials to criticize an emperor or to justify rebellion. As seen throughout Chinese dynastic histories, directly linking natural events to imperial legitimacy, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in a desperate attempt to show heaven their sincerity and virtue during times of severe drought, would reportedly undertake public acts of extreme asceticism, such as personally performing rain dances, or even standing exposed to the elements for prolonged periods, hoping to demonstrate their piety and convince heaven to send rain. Imagine the supreme ruler of a vast empire, soaking wet in a field, trying to make it rain. It highlights the profound pressure and spiritual theatrics involved. Historians still argue whether the concept of the mandate of heaven, which linked imperial rule to natural phenomena, primarily served as a powerful ideological tool for maintaining social order and justifying dynastic change. Or if it placed an unbearable and often unjust burden on emperors, leading to scapegoating and instability during times of crisis, did it unify or just punish regardless? Your reign as a Chinese emperor was perpetually shadowed by the risk of natural disasters, turning every drought, flood, or earthquake into a terrifying source of blame, a harbinger of famine, and a chilling omen of doom that could strip you of your divine right to rule. So, your reign as a Chinese emperor was perpetually shadowed by the risk of natural disasters, turning every drought, flood, or earthquake into a terrifying source of blame, a harbinger of famine, and a chilling omen of doom that could strip you of your divine right to rule. But even if the heavens were appeased and the empire stable, another insidious demand would wear you down daily: lack of sleep and overwork early mornings, late nights. Forget restful slumber or a balanced schedule. The duties of a Chinese emperor were a relentless grind, demanding punishing hours that often led to exhaustion and compromised judgment. Imagine your typical imperial day. It would begin long before dawn. You wouldn't wake up at your leisure, eunuchs would rouse you, and your morning rituals would commence. This meant early mornings, often rising hours before the sun. To prepare for the crucial daily audience, remember that concept of Zhao Chao where you would meet with your grand counselors and ministers. Imagine being pulled from a warm bed in the dead of night, knowing you face hours of complex discussions and critical decision-making before most people have even had their first cup of coffee. It's like being permanently stuck on a red-eye flight. But the destination is just another day of relentless work. These morning audiences and subsequent meetings with individual officials or military commanders could stretch for hours. Then would come the immense volume of paperwork. Remember that endless bureaucracy, reading memorials, drafting edicts, and reviewing reports. This was a continuous intellectual and administrative effort, requiring intense concentration. There were no leisurely lunch breaks or mid-afternoon naps. Your meals, while elaborate, were often consumed quickly, fitting into a tightly packed schedule. Your days would frequently extend into late nights. More memorials would arrive, requiring your attention. You might have to meet with palace staff, attend to harem matters, or engage in private discussions with trusted advisors that stretched into the evening. Even personal interests, if indulged, would often be pursued in the small hours, stealing precious sleep time. Imagine working non-stop, from before dawn until well after dark, every single day, with barely any personal time in between. It's enough to make you long for a simple 9-to-5 job. With weekends off, this overwork was compounded by the psychological pressures we've already discussed: the constant threat of assassination, the harem intrigues, the fear of usurpation, and the immense burden of governing millions. Every decision carried immense weight. Contributing to mental fatigue, emperors often had little time for physical exercise or genuine relaxation. Further deteriorating their health, the lack of sleep was not just an inconvenience. It could seriously impair judgment. A tired emperor might make rash decisions, miss crucial details, or become susceptible to manipulation by cunning courtiers. Imperial history is replete with accounts of emperors whose effectiveness declined due to chronic exhaustion, leading to misgovernance and dynastic decline. Your imperial reign could literally be undone by sleep deprivation. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this overwork is the meticulous court records that document the daily schedules of emperors, often showing them engaging in official duties for 10 or 12 hours or more per day, especially during active reigns like that of the Kangxi or Yongjing emperors of the Qing dynasty. who were famous for their diligence. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, desperate for a moment of quiet or a brief respite from constant duties, would sometimes feign illness, or even pretend to be asleep, just to avoid an unwanted audience or an exhausting ceremony. Imagine the supreme ruler of China faking a cough to get out of a meeting. It highlights the immense pressure and lack of agency they faced, even in their own physical well-being. Historians still argue whether the relentless workload and lack of sleep for Chinese emperors primarily contributed to early deaths and a succession of short reigns, thus undermining dynastic stability, or if it cultivated a necessary resilience and commitment to duty, ensuring that only the most dedicated leaders survived the rigors of the throne. Did it kill them, or just make them stronger? Regardless, your life as a Chinese emperor was a perpetual marathon of overwork, defined by early mornings and late nights, where the constant lack of sleep was not just a discomfort, but a fundamental imperial burden. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was a perpetual marathon of overwork, defined by early mornings and late nights, where the constant lack of sleep was not just a discomfort, but a fundamental imperial burden. But even beyond the exhaustion, you, the Son of Heaven, were never truly a person in your own right. Your very existence was a continuous, demanding act of ceremonial performance, divine mandate, public persona. Forget individual identity or genuine self-expression. You were a living symbol, a sacred figure whose every public act served to legitimate your rule and embody the cosmic order. Imagine your entire life as a meticulously choreographed play. From the moment you ascended the throne, you ceased to be merely a man. You became the public persona of the emperor, the embodiment of the state, the Son of Heaven, and the link between the mortal and divine realms. Every public appearance, every audience, every ritual was a carefully scripted performance, designed to reinforce your authority and inspire awe. It's like being the lead actor in a never-ending, high-budget historical drama, and the entire fate of the country depends on your performance being flawless. The concept of the divine mandate was central to your legitimacy. You ruled because heaven had granted you the right, and your virtuous conduct was essential to maintaining this mandate. This meant that your ceremonial performance wasn't just about pomp and circumstance, it was about demonstrating your worthiness to heaven and to your subjects. Imagine having to conduct elaborate rituals, offer sacrifices at the altar of heaven, or lead solemn processions, all while projecting an image of serene wisdom and unblemished virtue. Knowing that any perceived misstep could be interpreted as a sign of heaven's displeasure, this constant performance left little room for genuine self-expression. Your personal feelings, your joys, your sorrows all had to be subsumed beneath the imperial facade. You couldn't appear weak, indecisive, or overly emotional in public. Every gesture, every facial expression, even your tone of voice, had to convey imperial majesty and unwavering authority. Imagine having to suppress a yawn during a lengthy ceremony, or hide a grimace of pain during a long procession, simply because your public image was paramount. It's enough to make you wish for the simple freedom of making a bad face. Your daily routine was a series of these performances: the daily audience, the reception of foreign envoys, the review of troops, the offering of sacrifices. Each was a theatrical event with specific costumes, gestures, and spoken lines, even seemingly private acts, like receiving a concubine, could be recorded and subject to imperial protocol, making them part of the broader ceremonial performance of your life. This incessant requirement to perform, to constantly embody a divine and infallible figure, was profoundly dehumanizing. It meant that you rarely had the luxury of simply being yourself. You were a living symbol, a vessel for the empire, constantly performing your divine right to rule. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this ceremonial performance is the elaborate annual rites performed by the emperor at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, where he would conduct prayers and sacrifices to heaven on behalf of the entire nation, demonstrating his unique intermediary role between the earthly and celestial realms. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in an effort to maintain their majestic public persona, would rarely speak directly to lower-ranking officials or servants, instead communicating through trusted eunuchs or by simply gesturing, creating an aura of remote divinity that discouraged informal interaction. Imagine trying to explain your complicated problem to the ruler of millions, and he just points vaguely in the direction of a servant. It's a rather detached management style. Historians still argue whether the elaborate ceremonial performance of Chinese emperors primarily served to reinforce the stability and legitimacy of the imperial system by making the ruler seem infallible and divinely ordained, or if it increasingly detached emperors from the realities of their people and fostered a culture of sycophancy, hindering effective governance. Did it create reverence or just delusion? Regardless, your life as a Chinese emperor was an unending act of ceremonial performance, a constant embodiment of the divine mandate through your carefully crafted public persona, leaving precious little room for the man beneath the dragon robes. So, your life as a Chinese emperor was an unending act of ceremonial performance, a constant embodiment of the divine mandate through your carefully crafted public persona, leaving precious little room for the man beneath the dragon robes, and at the very core of all these burdens, fears, and performances was the ultimate existential dread that haunted every single one of your predecessors: fear of losing mandate of heaven legitimacy, divine disfavor. Forget just losing a war or facing a rebellion. Losing heaven's approval meant losing everything your right to rule, your dynasty, and often, your life. Imagine waking up every day with the weight of cosmic approval on your shoulders. The mandate of heaven wasn't just a philosophical concept, it was the bedrock of imperial legitimacy in China. It asserted that heaven bestowed the right to rule upon a just and benevolent emperor. If an emperor became tyrannical, ineffective, or simply unlucky, especially with those natural disasters we discussed, heaven would withdraw its mandate, signaling this withdrawal through various signs. This profound fear of losing the mandate of heaven was the ultimate existential crisis for an emperor. It's like being a perpetual job applicant, but the interview is conducted by the universe itself. And if you fail, you and your entire family are summarily fired. Permanently. The signs of divine disfavor were varied and terrifying, as we covered. Devastating floods, prolonged droughts, earthquakes, or widespread famine were considered direct evidence that heaven was displeased with your rule. But so too were bad omens, like comets or unusual celestial alignments. And, perhaps most terrifyingly, widespread peasant rebellions or successful invasions were seen as heaven's ultimate judgment, proving that you had indeed forfeited your right to rule. Imagine trying to sleep at night, knowing that a meteor shower or a bad harvest in a distant province could be interpreted as the universe giving you a divine pink slip. This meant a constant obsession with demonstrating your legitimacy. You had to be seen as a virtuous ruler, capable of maintaining harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. This fueled your participation in those endless rituals and ceremonies. Remember the ceremonial performance, designed to show your piety and reverence for the cosmic order. You would carefully choose your officials, try to manage the economy, and attempt to suppress dissent, all in an effort to prove that you were still worthy of heaven's favor. The consequences of losing the mandate were catastrophic. It didn't just mean a change in leadership. It meant the collapse of your dynasty, the probable destruction of your family line, and almost certainly, your own violent death. A successful rebel leader would justify his usurpation by claiming that heaven had transferred the mandate to him, making your downfall a divinely ordained event. Imagine watching your empire crumble, knowing that the very cosmos was deemed to be against you. This ultimate insecurity permeated every aspect of imperial life, making the emperor's vast power feel surprisingly precarious. Every decision, every challenge, every natural event was filtered through the lens of this terrifying existential threat. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this fear is the regular issuance of edicts of self-criticism, Zuijizhao, by emperors during times of crisis, especially after natural disasters or military defeats, where they would publicly acknowledge their own shortcomings and ask for heaven's forgiveness. A direct appeal to regain legitimacy and avert divine wrath. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some emperors, in moments of extreme fear regarding the mandate, would reportedly commission special divination rituals involving tortoise shells or yarrow stalks, seeking direct answers from heaven about their fate, hoping for a sign that they were still on the right path. Imagine the most powerful man in the world consulting an ancient form of Ouija board to figure out if he's still got his job. It's a very personal, desperate form of imperial performance anxiety. Historians still argue whether the concept of the mandate of heaven primarily served as a powerful ideological tool that legitimized the dynastic cycle and justified rebellion against unjust rulers, thereby acting as a safety valve for societal pressure, or if it placed an impossible and arbitrary burden on individual emperors, fostering paranoia and leading to a preoccupation with omens rather than practical governance. Did it maintain order, or just justify chaos regardless? Your entire existence as a Chinese emperor was a constant, terrifying struggle against the ultimate specter of the fear of losing the mandate of heaven, where your legitimacy was perpetually in question, and the slightest misfortune could signify inescapable divine disfavor, leading to your absolute downfall. Now, let the heavy silk robes fade, the clatter of the court recede, and the endless anxieties of the dragon throne gently dissipate. The vast, silent courtyards empty, the whispers of intrigue soften, and the oppressive weight of duty lifts from your shoulders. There's no more fear of poison, no more dread of an empty cradle, and no more agonizing concern about the mandate of heaven. Just the soft hum of your fan, the gentle warmth of your blanket, and the profound quiet of your room. You can release the imagined burdens of that awful imperial life, the suffocating isolation, the relentless scrutiny, and the terrifying responsibility for millions. That complex, fascinating, yet undeniably brutal ancient world of the Chinese emperor belongs to history, not to your peaceful present. Drift now into a deep, untroubled rest. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.